Recording for the meeting. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Glenn. I'm Deputy Director of Division of Marine Fisheries, and I'm going to be chairing today's meeting for the Shellfish Advisory Panel, and would like to bring the meeting to order. We have a pretty full agenda today with lots of updates from both DMF as well as some of our working groups, and then time on the agenda at the end for to develop future agenda items and address any public questions or comments. I will remind folks that this is a public body business meeting, and so we will not take questions and or comments from the public during the meeting, except for at the end when it's specifically on the agenda to do that. And with that, I welcome everybody here today, and I'll turn it over to our director, Dan McKiernan.
Thank you, Bob. I want to welcome newest member, George Delaney.
Yeah, we should, before we get started, we should call the roll. As is a virtual meeting, we need a roll call attendance at the start of the meeting. Bradley, can you begin?
Yeah, get started with that. So I'll start with the panel members. When you hear your name, if you could just announce yourself and come off mute, let me know that you're here. So Jim Abbott. Ron Bergstrom. Amy Croteau.
Here.
Thank you. Michael DeVasto. William Doyle.
Here.
Thank you. Renee Gagne. Seth Garfield. Alex Hay.
Present.
Thank you. Stephen Kirk. Dale Levitt. Rosh Rootsma.
Here.
Alan Renkerl.
Here.
Thank you. John Toes.
Yeah, it's Towns here.
Towns, sorry, thank you.
No worries. All right, thank you.
And George Delaney.
Here.
Right.
Okay. And then, sorry, before you go, Dan, I'll move on to the legislative appointed members. So I'll say the position, and then if you could just say your name or if you're a proxy. So the DMF director.
Dan McKiernan is here.
Okay, commissioner from the Department of Agricultural Resources.
Ashley Randall's here. Thank you.
Department of Environmental Protection Commissioner.
Nate Corcoran. I'm a representative for DEP.
Thanks. Director of Office of Coastal Zone Management.
Hi, Todd Callahan here, representing Alison Brizius from CZM.
Thank you. Director of the Division of Food Protection.
Mike Moore, representative, Department of Public Health. Present.
Executive Director of the Commission on Indian Affairs. Okay. Senate Chair for the Joint Committee on Environment and Natural Resources. Okay. And House Chair for Joint Committee on Agriculture.
I am State Representative Natalie Blake, taking over from Representative Schmidt.
Right.
Great. All right, thank you.
All set?
All set.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Just I'm Dan McKiernan, the director at DMF, and I think we've been at this. We've been together, most of us, for about 10 years now, when we created this first informally, and then about 3 years ago, we created it more formally through legislation after the Shellfish strategic plan was completed by the so-called Massachusetts Shellfish Initiative, which was a grant that was given to a group, the Cape Cod Fishermen's Alliance, the Mass Aquaculture Association, and trying to remember who else was on that. And nonetheless, a great effort, and there's a very extensive strategic plan as well as a background document. So if anybody is interested in diving into the essential details of all things shellfish, I would urge you to go to that website. If you need help finding it, just drop us a line and we'll help you find that. So we do have a new member, and his name is George Delaney. George, if you want to raise your hand. We're really thrilled that he's with us. We wanted to get a North Shore board representative, and for years we had Mike Cupiano from Ipswich Shellfish, and essentially George is filling that niche now. So welcome, George. We really appreciate your time and your interest. We have 2 new DMF staff, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about Sean Burrell, our new DMF Habitat Restoration Specialist, working with our habitat program and our shellfish program on permitting and restoration projects in Massachusetts. And this is a collaborative between USDA, DMF, Nature Conservancy, and the Cape Cod Conservation District. And Sean is stationed in Gloucester, and he's on today. And then finally, Bradley Morgan, who took the attendance, is our newest employee working on outreach and communications of the fisheries management policy team. She works directly for Jared Silver, and she's down here in New Bedford. So I'd like to, in these kind of opening comments, kind of give you a sense of like what's causing, what's tying us up. You know, what are we spending a lot of our time on? I have to admit, it's the federal situation, which is really challenging because.
Hey, Dan, can I ask you a question before we?
Sure.
This is Dylan Fernandez. Good to see you. Someone sent us a note saying because we're chairing ag this session that we're on this committee, but we just heard that in the opening that it's the ENR chair on the Senate side. So
yeah,
I'm just a little confused.
That's a great question. I believe the legislature amended the statute of our committee when they split the committees. So I don't have.
It sounds like it was ENR on the Senate side and ag on the House side. Is that, at least that's what it was said at the opening. So I'm not sure if we are supposed to be here or not, but we got a note saying to come.
Jared
because
Morgan,
of our committee.
Can you look up section, I think it's section 2 of chapter 130? Okay, answer Dylan's question. And Dylan, you're coming across as Skylar Nash.
Oh, that's my chief of staff. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, Jared, are you on that?
But sorry, and you can press ahead.
I believe the legislature fixed this, so we could clarify this in terms of participation. So why don't we proceed? Wayne, go ahead. Wayne Castonway.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, just clarified that the ENR has been removed from the committee with recent update to the legislation. So I think what we heard at the roll call was an error. So it's really the Joint Committee on Agriculture, one from the Senate and one from the House. So I think that's why you would be here.
All right, great. That's great. Thanks for clarifying. Just wanted to make sure we're in the right place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay.
It's nice to see my Senate co-chair here. Good to see you, Dylan.
Good to see you.
Dan, also, this is Michael DeVasto. Just I was not in as a panelist when my name was read, I guess. So
great.
Just let you know I'm here.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Seth Garfield arrived as well, since we're getting updated on attendance.
Thank you. So I was saying a few minutes ago, one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing at DMF is these cuts in the federal system, whether it be the probationary employees that we hear about being cut or expected downsizing, but there's very little information that we're getting from the federal agencies. And in fact, there's there seems to be very little communication, and even kind of a I don't know if it's a deliberate, but kind of a lack of participation as things are kind of chaotic on the federal side. So I have to admit that this is causing us, and I'm sure a lot of folks on even on this call that receive grants or are dependent on federal fisheries management or FDA's ongoing work. It's been really, really challenging. And so we've been asked in some instances to help like create some communications about what some of these cuts are going to mean to our working relationships and to our business. And it's really hard because we actually don't know what the cuts are, but we know there's a lot of angst, and there's a lot of challenges within our federal partners, and it's I feel bad for them, but and it's been very, very challenging. So that's been tough, and it's also been very distracting because we're all scrambling, even as we're talking to FDA on some issues. Although we have had some recent communications with FDA, but there are some questions about future FDA-sponsored events as to whether those are going to happen. So that's been going on. And the other thing that's been tying us up, obviously, is there was a reclassification exercise up in Ipswich that resulted in a closure that is larger than what was previously enacted, and the controversy that erupted, especially within the community up there. And so we've been dealing with that, or trying to deal with that, and we're trying to get into three-way conversations or four-way conversations with the town, along with FDA, who write or who are responsible for the model ordinance through the ISSC, the Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Conference, and then, of course, as well with our own Department of Public Health, because dilution rates are important for public health around sewage treatment plant outfalls. So that's been very challenging as well. So in the shellfish front for me over the last few months, that's where we've been spending a lot of energy. So I just wanted to give folks a sense of what's going on. But at this point, I think we can, if there's no questions to me, we can go to approving the agenda in the minutes. Turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great introduction, and sorry about the little blips that we had at a roll call. We're getting used to the new changes, and we'll make sure to amend that moving forward. Anyway, so let's move on to review and approval of the November meeting minutes. So do I have a motion to approve minutes, or does folks have any amendments?
I move the motion or the minutes be accepted as written.
And can I have a second on that?
Second, Ashley Randall.
Dan has his hand up.
See, Bob,
Dan?
I actually have a few edits, and I mean, most of them are typos, and I've gone over those with Wayne, and they're obvious. But there was one, and had to do on page 7, and actually a few on page 7. And the first one is there's under the section FDA annual audit, there's a sentence about compliance with the exception of a major violation observed by one harvester, and that should be attributable to one harvester, just for clarification. And the other correction I would request is in the paragraph under surf clam geofencing, it refers to a new DEP regulation that does not consider fishing as an activity regulated under the Wetlands Protection Act. That should read, when coupled with the new DMF statute, because DEP didn't change their regulations. That the way this was changed legally was in an amendment to DMF's statute, chapter 130. And I think that's just for the record. I'd like to make that change.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Can I then have a motion to accept the minutes as amended by Dan?
I'll make that motion. Amy Croto.
Thanks, Amy. And do I have a second?
Second by Seth Garfield.
Thank you, Seth. Okay. And now I believe, because it's an online meeting, we need to do a roll call vote on this.
Okay. So Jim Abbott, Ron Bergstrom,
Yes.
Amy Cruchot,
Yes.
Michael DeVasto,
Yes.
William Doyle,
Yes.
Renee Gagne,
Yes.
Seth Garfield,
Yes.
Alex Hay, Josh Rietzma,
Yes.
Alan Rencurl,
Yes.
John Towns,
Yes.
George Delaney,
Yes.
Jim Peters.
Yes.
Okay. Do I go through the legislative as well?
Yes, all of the appointees to the panel must
Okay.
vote.
Dan McKiernan,
Yes.
Ashley Randall,
Yes.
Nate Corcoran,
Yes.
Todd Callaghan,
Yes.
Michael Moore,
Yes.
Dylan Fernandez,
Yes.
and
Corinne Coriat.
So I had to rename myself. It's State Representative Natalie Blay.
Thank
And
you.
I wasn't here, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bradley. All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. All right, so moving on to the next agenda item, our work group updates. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to DMF, our aquaculture project leader, Alex Boeri, to give us an update for us on the aquaculture license transfer work group.
Hi, everybody. As Bob just said, if you don't know me, I'm Alex Boeri. I'm the aquaculture project lead here at DMF, and I've been working with the aquaculture license transfer working group. If you'll remember at the last SAP meeting, Wayne showed some slides with some preliminary results from the license transfer survey that was sent to all towns. Since that time, the work group has met several times with the primary focus of completing a white paper outlining some of the background of license transfers, including the issues and what towns currently do, as well as to identify what works well for towns and what challenges towns face, with the goal of informing the SAP and ultimately informing other municipalities that may be getting started or rewriting their regulations. That white paper, we have a draft in progress currently. I would say it's about halfway done before it's been edited by the whole group. I anticipate at the next SAP meeting we'll have something complete for you all to read. As part of that process, some of the work group members had raised concerns about the transfer being sent only to towns and looking for more input from other concerned groups, such as the growers, potentially even further than that. And so we've started to collect some questions for an additional survey, and we'll work through paring down those questions, picking out which ones we think are most relevant, and may come forward at the next SAP meeting with recommendation to conduct an additional survey to growers and potentially other interested parties as well. But that's all I have for an update to the license transfer working group. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks. Anyone have any questions or comments for Alex?
Director McKiernan.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment for our legislative members. And this particular topic was a very controversial one back when that Massachusetts Shellfish Initiative was kicked off, because just as it was kicked off, there was legislation filed, a proposed legislation, on behalf of constituents, as you guys always do at the beginning of your session. And it was trying to amend Chapter 130, Section 58, that has to do with transfers. And the theme of this, and I don't want to get into a debate, but just I want to bring you guys up to speed or give you some background, is that the oyster farmers, in essence, were looking for a kind of a more secured arrangement where their permits would be transferred. They would have a little bit more control over the site licenses that they've been granted by the town. And so it became controversial really fast, and it almost derailed the entire Shellfish initiative's attempt to do a strategic plan, because a lot of folks either misinterpreted or didn't trust the intent of the proposal. So us kind of attacking this is to, I shouldn't say attacking, addressing it is to try to inventory the community's policies and sort of approaches for how municipally approved site licenses might get transferred to new members, for instance. So they have waiting lists, or can you invite someone to join your grant as like a co-grantee or a co-licensee, and then how do you get new people into the industry? So that's kind of the essence of it. And one of the things I was hoping, because this was filed as legislation and created a lot of angst, one of the purposes of the Shellfish Advisory Panel would be to bring forward these kind of analyses. And so if legislation were to be filed in the future, the legislature would be able to come to this group and try to get clarification. It's like, what is this about? What are the implications? So I really appreciate the work that the team is doing on this one, because it is an interesting one, because these are municipally controlled licenses, at the municipal level, but there are some substantial differences from town to town. So that's the background.
Dan, was that legislation refiled this session?
No, I don't believe it's been refiled since. It was back in 2018, actually.
Okay.
It was known as the Cutler Bill. Josh Cutler filed it on behalf of MMA. So anyway,
thank you.
Mike DeVasto, go ahead.
Yeah, also just to add to that, I think a lot of the work that we have been doing on that subcommittee is been sort of focused around the idea that every municipality is different, and that there's no directives being issued out of the subcommittee. It's really because there are a lot of young aquaculture industries, there's a sort of natural growth in the industry that sort of leads to some sort of discussion about transferability in that municipality inevitably as time goes on, as initial license holders sort of age out or whatever. And the older industries have sort of dealt with that in slightly different ways. And so just putting together this report, I think, is beneficial for newer community, more beneficial I think, for newer communities that are engaging in aquaculture that really don't have rules or regulations set up around it or haven't really considered it yet.
Thanks, Mike. Right on.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, anybody else? Okay, then next we're going to move on to the Shellfish Hatchery Working Group, and a little bit of context here. Here is that a few years ago, common thread of discussion at the SAP. I believe this goes back to, I want to say 2023, but some of the growers could interject here. But it was a year whereby it was getting extremely difficult for growers to get all the seed capacity that they had for their operations. And so with that was born the concept of putting together a shellfish hatchery working group to kind of look at and address the issues related to shellfish seed. So with that, I'm going to recognize Chloe Starr. Chloe.
Hi, thanks, Bob. All right, I see a lot of familiar faces here. My name is Chloe Starr. I am the operations manager at Aquacultural Research Corporation in Dennis, which is a shellfish hatchery based on the Cape. And we held our first working group meeting about 3 weeks ago in the end of February. Members of the committee include Shellfish Advisory Panel members and some technical experts from other hatcheries, including Hannah Pearson from Island Creek and Dan Ward. And I also want to shout out Wayne for helping put together these meeting notes, so I remember what we talked about a month ago. It's a long time. And so we just kind of started off with a discussion about the state of the hatchery sector and what we had heard were issues going on. As Bob had mentioned, kind of the impetus for this group was a limited seed supply issue a few years back. But as the discussion continued, we realized that it was more of a broader based mission that we needed. And to that end, we settled on a charge for the group to investigate the issues facing the shellfish hatchery sector and provide support to this vital component of the Massachusetts shellfishing industry. And so that is what we settled on as our mission on this working group. And the tasks that we recognized that needed to happen out of this working group include conducting an analysis of DMF seed purchase statistics and grower inquiries to just get, again, everyone's input on what issues are facing them in their seed supply. Take a survey of neighboring states just to get a sense of what seed supply is looking like in the region as a whole. Look into the issue of the pathologist and general pathology shortages that exist in the industry. Thinking about some kind of grower education and outreach on the husbandry of seed. So kind of trying to prevent mass mortality from various handling issues potentially. Research and implement strategies to reduce the costs associated with producing seed. Speaking from experience from ARC, we have seen our production costs go up significantly, but have not necessarily seen that on the price that farmers are getting for their oysters right now. And really the main goal is to increase the sustainability and resiliency of the seed supply in Massachusetts aquaculture so that everyone who wants seed can get their seed is really, I think, the goal of this committee. And so that is where we started. Again, it was just our inaugural initial kickoff meeting, but that is already where we've gotten in terms of where we would like to see the working group put its efforts into. So that is my hopefully short and sweet update there. If anyone has any questions, let me know, and either me or somebody on the working group can answer them.
That's great, Chloe. Thanks for the update, and I'm really encouraged that you guys are tackling that. And I like the scope of kind of the slightly expanded mission scope that you guys put together. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Does anyone have any questions for or comments for Chloe and for the working group?
Not seeing any of the hands raised, Bob.
Not seeing any. Okay, excellent. Great update, Chloe. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, we're cruising right along. Next on the agenda is an update from the Massachusetts Shellfish Officers Association, and we're graced today with Renee Gagny, who's going to give us an update on that. Renee, you are recognized.
Thank you, everyone. Renee Gagny, I'm the Shellfish Constable for the town of Chatham. I'm also the Vice President for MSOA. I was asked to give up this update. We had held our annual convention last week, but most of the convention was the DMF update, which you're going to be getting soon. So this would be very brief. One of the updates I usually bring at each one of our meetings is where we stand with the constable certification course. For those of you who don't know, most towns require shellfish constables to go through the certification process, and that's what some of the requirements are for many of the towns. In years past, we had an 80-hour course held at the Maritime Academy, and we called it PowerPoint Purgatory. It was all in person. And during COVID, there was such a number of people that needed certification. We did an all online one. So we pared that down. And so there were a lot of negative inputs about the PowerPoint Purgatory course and also about the only online course as well. So since then, we've been trying to create some type of a hybrid concept. And we had Grace Simkin from Hui Sea Grant give a presentation a few meetings back, kind of putting together all of the input from our members and what we would like to see as a professional constable training class. And so the next step was trying to bring that concept to and finding a learning management system that could take this over. For the most part, it's been members from MSOA in partnership with DMF who have been putting this course together, neither of whom are professional educators. So we were really hoping to get this passed on to people who really knew what they were doing. Since then, I have some great news that we've made some great strides. Henry was able to get a meeting with the Cape Cod Community College, and they think this is great. They want to take this on. And so we're now working on meetings. We have a meeting next Thursday, and I believe Chrissy and Matt will be joining us. We gave them the agenda, the syllabus that we use for our online only. So they have an idea of what the training will be involved with. And they foresee having that hybrid concept where they would, the course would be within one semester, and each week would have different modules that the folks would have to fulfill within that 1 week. There would be online office hours, so folks could call in with any of their questions and perhaps organize with the folks taking the course a couple of times where people could all get together and discuss what was going on and also ask additional questions. They also foresee having 3 in-person days where people would be able to get lab work done. That's one of the big things that we were missing with the online, because I know we held a number of them at Mass Maritime. Dale and Diane Murphy gave shellfish biology. So all of that was some of the hands-on crucial stuff that a total online course really kind of missed. They also thought about having field trips to perhaps a hatchery and to a working farm, etc. And all of that gives people the opportunity for networking as well. So again, our next step is getting all of the people involved that will help with the curriculum. DMF has always been involved in all of these meetings, and so now we need to get some of our other partners. I reached out to the OLE this week. I have not heard back from them. They want to assign a liaison because they are really an important piece of this pie, the whole enforcement aspect. So we're really hoping to get them on board ASAP, because we really think we can get this course up and running by the fall semester. So it's going to be a lot of work, but once this is passed on, it will be passed on. And so we're all looking forward to that. So if anyone has any questions. Oh, and on top of which, we were also tasked with looking at amending section 98 of 130, which actually mentions the constable course in it. But we really felt we wanted to get this course up and running before we actually attempted to look at that language so we wouldn't have to go back and change things up again. Another part of the examining 98 was some of our members are still having some issues with the clarity of their authority within 98. So that's another thing that MSOA members are working on. And we're putting together some bullets that we can, I think, send to Jared is the next step, and to take a look at some of the questions that some of our memberships have concerning their authority under 98.
Excellent, Renee. Great update. And Dan, you have a
Yeah, I just want to emphasize what Renee said for our legislative members, because I think this is a really important one. We may need some earmark to launch this in some capacity. I mean, we've been lucky enough to get the volunteer time of many of the constables, but this may require some upfront investment, and so I can't be sure at this point. We're working with MSOA and the Cape Cod Community College to figure out what the exact cost would be to get this thing fully launched. And also, I want to reemphasize what Renee is talking about with the complications of the post commission, and that really has been a challenging one. It came up during training to try to explain in light of the post commission. And for those who don't know, that's the commission on police reform, where certain standards were created, and it was not clear whether or not a constable, a Shellfish constable, which obviously doesn't have to go through the State Police Academy, needs to be subjected to some of those same standards. So we're going to be working with MSOA and some of our department team up at the Department of Fish and Game, and maybe put together some kind of a position paper that maybe our legislative members here could consider turning into some kind of legislation to improve the situation for constables and make it cleaner. We really do depend on the front line of enforcement from the Shellfish constables to keep Shellfish sustainable, and they've been great partners. So this is one of the things you might want to be take notes on and be ready to engage with us, offline, because this is a huge need for the constables and for DMF.
Can I ask, it was unclear to me, are the constables, do they have to go through post or not?
No, but some
Okay.
are, like some of the members who are some
They're
of the
just choosing to.
constables already do that because they are members of the police force. Some don't. It's different among the towns. Renee, do you want to speak to that?
Well, yes, there are some towns that their Shellfish department is located or under the police department. So I suspect some of those folks do. And in all honesty, Dan, I really don't know what the details are as far as the post criteria, but I do know that each town really designates their Shellfish constable under. I'm under the Department of Natural Resources. I believe Amy is as well. So each town is very different, and there are some that have dual purposes. They're harbor master, Shellfish. So it is a very confusing.
Yeah,
we are confusing entities.
Well, and that's in essence why the training became confusing, because as you train constables to sort of common methods and common standards, all of a sudden the post commission details came up, and we were pumping the brakes on how to delineate sort of the specifics in training, because of you want to give your incoming constables information on what the laws are that you're applying and how to conduct a search and all that stuff. So that's where the confusion came. So it might require some clarification about whether Shellfish constables, where they fall, in the jurisdiction of the post commission.
And that being said, our course curriculum has been fairly consistent over the years with the law enforcement aspect of it, but with all of the others as well. So we can share that information. That in and of itself has been very consistent with the help of our partners over at OLE.
Could I just ask oh, sorry, go ahead, Dylan.
Well, just two quick things. One is, we have budget meetings in the next mine's in like 10 days. So, we can file anything, but if you want to get us in front of our respective House and Senate budget chairs to get this in front of them, you'd probably want to send us something in the next 7 days.
Okay.
Not the end of the world if you don't, but it's just better if you do.
Good to know.
So that's on that piece. And then, I guess send us what your recommendation is in regards to post. I don't know enough about it. I can just say that Shellfish constables, when we were originally doing post, it wasn't our intent to have you guys go through it. So, but maybe there's some synergy. I mean, I don't know enough about, maybe there's some synergy there. That post is largely paid for, so maybe there's some good things there too. You guys just tell me. And we're happy to do whatever you guys think makes the most sense. But that post is largely pretty well funded and running pretty well for doing what it's supposed to do, with some hiccups. I don't know, and maybe there's an avenue there to get some of your programming funded. I don't know, but it's just to say I don't know enough about that particular aspect to speak intelligently on it. So I just defer to you guys to let me know what's best to advocate for. But sorry, Natalie, I think you.
No, I was gonna ask the same question about the timing of the budget ask, because we're deep into the budget right now on the House side. So the sooner the better.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, any other questions or comments for Renee? Not seeing any. Okay. All right. The next thing on the agenda is something we're pretty excited about here at DMF. Is we're kind of embarking on a new venture or a new collaboration with the Nature Conservancy to do some shellfish habitat restoration work, and we're specifically looking at things like oyster reefs and other types. And with us today we have Dan Goulart from TNC here, as well as from DMF, we have Sean Terrell, who is one of the new DMF staff members who was brought on board to work on this collaboration. And this is a grant funded by NRCS that TNC was successful in getting to fund this work. And we're going to be collaborating with them. And so with us today, as I mentioned, is Dan, and Dan's going to give us a brief presentation, kind of talking about this new program.
All right. Hey, guys. Well, Jared gets that screen saved. Dan Goulart, I'm a New Bedford native, coming to you from Nature Conservancy, where I've been for about 4 months. Prior to that, I was over at Buzzards Bay Coalition, working with Corin Peterson on a whole variety of clean water advocacy issues. And then prior to that, in my former life, I was a Navy SEAL for just over 30 years. So come from a probably not your traditional background to be in this field, but super excited to be here. Really excited to be working with Steve Kirk and the guys over at DMF on this project, which is a restoration partnership that's really being enabled by NRCS funding. Next slide. This project really has its roots in sort of the MSI vision, and all the work that people who came before me put into having aquaculture recognized and put on equal footing with all the other agricultural programs, which enabled the funding to come to this program and to all the aquaculture growers who are also active partners on this program. Next slide. All right, so here's a quick project overview. There's a lot of stuff going on in this slide. I just want to hit a couple of high points. Really farmer-supported habitat restoration, implementing nature-based solutions like oyster reef restoration, salt marsh restoration, and restoration of eelgrass beds where possible, so that we can improve coastal ecosystems, which bring a whole host of benefits to fisheries, the economy, and community resilience, both from a climate change perspective and from a food security perspective. Some of our deliverables on this project is really statewide critical coastal restoration plan, and our analysis as we try to look at all of these big growing areas across the state. The analysis that goes into that to identify suitable sites will really feed into this coastal habitat restoration plan. Identifying and permitting 5 sites throughout Massachusetts where we do oyster, salt marsh, eelgrass, or a combination of in sort of a way that complements each other. Providing training to NRCS on coastal restoration, which is really not their strong point. And that's really where the Conservation District comes in with their expertise and training to provide a series of annual training events to NRCS Massachusetts staff. And then really facilitating some information sharing and best practices and SOPs that allow us to spread what we're doing to a broader audience and to carry this really beyond the 5-year grant-funded project and turn it into a much longer-term statewide coastal habitat restoration program that has legs of its own. I'm not going to really go into funding and just a little bit about timeline. And then I really want to save some time at the end to pass it off to our DMF partners like Mark Rousseau and Sean Terrell. But this year is really focused on looking at a statewide habitat suitability analysis using a lot of different data sources so that we can start to narrow down the communities where this can work, where we have viable aquaculture partners to partner on habitat restoration with us, and a lot of community outreach. And then next year, hoping to move into site selection and actually start permitting some of these projects so we can implement them across the final 3 years of the grant. Next slide. So why are we embarking on this project? And really, just 3 quick numbers there. 90% decline in eelgrass, 41% of salt marshes have been lost, and a huge percentage of our oyster reef and biomass has been lost over the last 50 to 100 years. Most of this is due to just man-made modifications, urbanization, land use changes, wider spread of septic systems, and all the other factors that go into the decline of coastal estuaries, which is really prime salt marsh, eelgrass, and oyster habitat. Next slide. And the goals of this project really tie into and help to support a lot of the bigger policy and plans that are in place in Massachusetts already, like the Mass Resilient Plan, where we're sort of directly or indirectly supporting 3 of the most urgent priority impacts. And then it also supports the governor's biodiversity executive order to increase coastal habitat, increase fisheries habitat, and really sustain biodiversity in the coastal region going forward. Next slide. So next steps, really putting together this habitat suitability model, developing between TNC, the Conservation District, and DMF, developing a methodology that we can, put forward and defend that shows how we went about prioritizing all the different sites throughout Massachusetts, and being able to narrow those down into a list of sort of final contenders that we want to try to move forward with. Conservation District's training plan, and then a lot of deliberate engagement with key municipal stakeholders and the communities themselves to raise awareness, educate people on the benefits of sort of all 3 of these and then some in habitat restoration, and then really just sort of developing our final engagement and communication strategies so that we can get the word out on this and really build broad public support and then get ongoing funding sources lined up. And with that said, I want to make sure that like Mark Russo and Sean Terrell, if you guys want to jump in, if you have anything to add on this, I wanted to save the rest of the time for you guys, and then we can take some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll just quickly jump in before I give it to, give an opportunity for Sean to weigh in. But, I wanted to say one great presentation, and DMF is really excited about it. This is kind of a landmark for us in that I would describe in the past, our attitude towards oyster reef restoration was that we had a fair amount of institutional hesitancy. And the reason for that is because of our dual mission of protecting and fisheries and promoting fisheries resources and fisheries habitat, along with at the same time protecting public health. And so because this is a bivalve shellfish that's important commercially and to some degree recreationally as a food source, and we manage the public health aspect of this. We have to tread fairly lightly in making sure that any work that's done relative to oyster reef restoration kind of comports well with our public health standards and our ability, not only our ability, but especially a municipality's ability to manage those concerns. And so, but nonetheless, given the long-term trends and declines that we've seen in coastal habitat and the importance that things like eelgrass and oyster reefs play in basically acting as nursery habitat to fisheries that we manage, we think it's critical to, at this juncture for us to dive in and work with TNC and other partners to figure out a path forward for doing this type of work. So we're excited about it. And one of our challenges early on will be working, with our shellfish classification staff to come up with kind of best operating practices to cite and permit these activities in a way that still maintains public health. And so it's really that fine balance that I want to kind of just touch on in this case as a secondary aspect to this that DMF is managing.
Awesome, great points, Bob.
Great. And then Sean, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Hey, yeah, I mean, it'd be good to just introduce myself. So I'm Sean Terrell. I am coming from the Army Corps of Engineers, where I spent the last 4 years doing benthic ecology work for them. Before that, I was at UMass Boston, getting my master's degree in benthic ecology. Really excited to be here. I'm kind of serving as the conduit between the habitat and shellfish program. And I think you'll be hearing more from us as we progress with this project. We'll be coming to the SAP with updates and proposals and whatnot. So yeah, just excited to be part of this project. And Mark, do you have anything to add?
Nothing more there. Great presentation, Dan. Just to say, except that Sean and Dan will likely be working very closely with all the municipalities as we try and iron out some prospective sites for restoration going forward. So thank you.
Excellent. Okay, great. Then I'll now open it up to any of the panelists if they have any questions or comments. Mike, I see that you've had your hand raised. You're recognized.
Hey. Hi, Dan. Yeah, are you guys looking at areas that are closed to harvest? Or are you looking at both open to harvest areas and closed to harvest? Are they sort of impaired waterways? That is a goal to improve impaired waterways as well as habitat restoration, or is it, I guess, yeah, not totally clear on because I know DMF has had a policy on not propagating in closed areas that are close to harvest. And I'm wondering if this is what we're talking about, because we have had some discussions about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably defer the most of this answer over to Mark, but I think, yes, we're open to everything. If we look at the coastal habitats all around the New England coast, it's the impaired estuaries, that most of which have TMDLs on them and have seen huge eelgrass and salt marsh loss over the last 50 years, is really where some of this restoration can have the greatest benefit, especially if there's already some upstream remediation taking place, whether that's stormwater or sewering or other activities that are improving water quality. Active restoration in those impaired estuaries can really accelerate, bringing them back to their former states. So, Mark, any further comments on that?
I'll just say at this stage, nothing is off the table. We're going to do a comprehensive look at all the areas, which will involve some mapping analyses and some specific site selection work. But currently, we're not. Nothing is off the table at this stage.
Just to follow up, if I could.
Of course, yeah,
Just-
by all means.
Okay, we're just in Wellfleet. We're at the beginning stages of opening the Herring River estuary. Sure you guys are aware of that. It's quite a large estuary. I guess I'd recommend reaching out to the town if you guys are interested in that area. It was at one time habitat to a lot of shellfish. Right now it's been completely closed off, except it's been diked for 100 years. So it's an interesting project going on there. And I don't know if it is closed right now conditionally, but might be something you are interested in looking at.
Thanks, Mike. Great points. Chrissy.
Thank you, Bob. Just to comment on that a little bit further, because of the public health aspect of this and sort of the idea that certain areas could be what we've termed as attractive nuisance, because specifically for oysters, because it's a high value shellfish. It's not just going to be the science and the suitability for certain locations to be reef sites, restoration sites. A big factor on whether we're going to allow at all oysters to be put into, say, a prohibited area. So there are varying levels of contaminated, right? So they're conditionally approved that are closed some of the time, but open some of the time. And they may be a little better suited to oyster reef restoration than prohibited areas, but the plan is to evaluate prohibited areas. And part of that evaluation will be the resources that towns have to enforce no poaching, whether it's, people, boots on the ground, whether there's cameras, the accessibility to these areas. So there are going to be a lot of factors beyond the restoration science that we're going to be taking into consideration. But as mentioned, for the first time, we're considering this. Before it was just, we're not even going to entertain the discussion in prohibited areas. So a large portion of what, Sean and Dan's work is going to be is maybe coming up with some best management practices that balance that, the ecosystem benefits of these restorations with making sure that, the market's safe from illegal poaching. Thanks.
Thanks, Chrissy. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. So I've only been here for 4 weeks now, but one of the things I'm doing now is talking with the classification area biologists to kind of get a lay of the land as to what towns have the kind of human capital and infrastructure there to be able to enforce keeping people out of restoration sites. So towns that don't have any shell fishing and don't really have the kind of industry built up there might be more challenging than places that have a big natural resource divisions and constables that are full-time and all of that. So that's a whole aspect of it that we're getting into now, and will be definitely the driving force in decision making moving forward.
Great, thanks, Sean. Great clarification. Dale, you're recognized.
Thanks, Bob. I just want to point out to the group that's working on identifying sites that there is some potential for these restoration sites to become disease reservoirs for shellfish. particularly oysters. And so I just want to make sure that everybody's cognizant that that's an issue that's got to be considered as they start working through actual site locations.
Great point, Dale. And I one that we're certainly, from what my understanding is, one of the requirements would obviously be pathological screening for any product brought in, but there may be other best management practices we would need to consider relative to that, and its relative location to other grants and things like that. Thank you. Go ahead, Sean. You quick response there.
Yeah, there has been some talk of pre-site selection disease screening. So that is something we're aware of.
Thanks. Okay. Any other panelists have any questions or comments about this? Okay, I'm not seeing any. In the attendees, Nancy, I do see you have your hand up, and because you're not one of the SAP members, I'm going to wait and recognize you during the public comment period, if that's okay. I appreciate it. We certainly welcome your comments. I'm just trying to follow the state's open meeting law rules. Okay. All right. Excellent, guy. Great presentation, Dan. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. If everyone's still comfortable and good, we'll just stay on track and we'll move on to the next agenda item. Or if folks need a few minutes for a biological break, that's fine too. We can break for 10 minutes and reconvene at 4:15. It's really at the leisure of the discretion of the SAP. So, any feelings? Are we good to continue?
I would make a motion to continue with no break.
Everyone good with that?
Yep.
Okay.
And then seconded Mike Moore.
Okay.
Works for me.
Perfect. And we'll just keep moving right along. Appreciate it. Just wanted to be considerate of folks. Okay. With that, we're going to move into DMF Shellfish programs updates. We have a bunch on the docket here, and so going to start with recognizing Matt Camisa, who's going to jump in and start it out. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Matt Camisa. I am the regional supervisor for the Shellfish program out of the New Bedford office. Wayne's counterpart down in New Bedford. He's up north. So my apologies to those of you that saw some of these slides last week at MSOA. I will be brief and let's get through them. So next slide, please. So we'll provide a handful of updates today. Personnel changes, our new marina policy matrix. We'll talk about the FDA audits. And then I think Bob is going to discuss derelict aquaculture fishing gear, a new topic for us. And I believe Wayne is going to dive into some of the wastewater treatment plant modeling issues. Next slide. Okay, so as I said last week at MSOA, this is usually my longest slide. I've been on Shellfish for 3 years now with the division for over 25. I've never seen turnover like we've seen in the last 3 years. You might be wondering what these security bars are on our rotating door. Chrissy installed them, so now people can only come in and no one can get out. So we have no one leaving to report since the last meeting, which is fantastic. We've already mentioned Sean Terrell several times. He's hired under Habitat, but we'll be working very closely with him. And we were finally able to get Gabe Lundgren's position upgraded as it should be. Gabe and Alex are the 2 DMF aquaculture staff members, basically overseeing the entire aquaculture project. Next slide. Okay, so similar to our mooring area matrix that we introduced last year, we have come up with a draft marina matrix. And every marina has to be evaluated, and a marina is a marina if it has more than 10 boats. And if there are more than 10 boats in the water, that marina needs to be closed. If the marina has more than 10 boats year round, that marina is classified as prohibited. If it's a marina that all of the boats get taken out in the winter, it can be classified conditionally approved, closed when there's more than 10 boats there, and then pop open in the fall once there's less than 10 boats, and then it'll close again the following spring as the boats go back in the water. One of the issues that we're having is there are some marinas that have a lot of boats and very little water for dilution purposes for our calculations. This is a good example. This is Taylor Point Marine in Bourne, run by the town, extremely well-run marina. You can see there are a lot of boats in there and very little water. When that happens, sometimes when we run our dilution calculator, we have to expand that closure outside of the marina proper. And so that means it affects adjacent areas to the marina, which can be devastating depending on the proximity of the marina to, let's say, aquaculture grants or very rich wild beds of steamers or cohogs. So we've come up with a matrix that where we're going to classify what type of marina it is, how many boats, how many berths, do they allow overnight stays, is there adequate pump out, are there houseboats, liveaboards, and depending on what level of a marina type you are, we've come up with some requirements to be able to minimize the effects to the adjacent areas around the marina. So we introduced this to the constables last week at the MSOA meeting. So this is very similar to our mooring area when we just did this last year with mooring areas. There is the potential to harvest in a mooring area and in a marina when there are less than 10 boats. And these are the requirements that we would expect of the marina operators and or the town to ensure public health safety around the marina. Next slide. Okay, so FDA audits. We are scheduled to have our growing area audit, the growing area pier, the first full week of August. And they're only going to be visiting South Shore areas this year. So there are 4 in Buzzards Bay, the Lee and Cole River over in Mount Hope Bay, 4 in South Cape, and then we're taking them out to the island for a day. There's a chance, as you probably have heard, that communications are very limited with FDA, travel, trainings, all of that. There's a chance that it might not happen, or it might happen virtually. Maybe we send them all of our reports, they review them from a distance, and come back to us with questions and concerns and whatnot. We're just not sure what's going to happen. But these are the areas that will be reviewed for the growing area audit, if anything happens this year. Next slide. There are also 2 other FDA audits, the risk assessment, risk management, that's RARM. So last year we did so good that they're not coming back this year. They can go to every other year. So that's fantastic news. There were a few issues that they brought up during the 2024 RARM that we continue to monitor and try to make progress on. Ice slurry being down to 45 degrees. Dealer trucks, they witnessed a dealer truck at the landing that had not even gotten close to 45 degrees when the boat was there ready to load into the truck. That's a problem. The water hose, they encountered a water hose that didn't have a backflow preventer or a check valve. That was a problem. It was installed either same day or next day by that company. Solved that one. And then there's the concern of residential ice machine inspections. All ice used for aquaculture is supposed to be from an approved source, and if it's a residential ice machine, it's not inspected, therefore technically not approved. So that was one of their big concerns, and we'll be working on how to solve that problem. The other audit would be the control of harvest. This is largely MEP, Environmental Police. We've had this long-standing deficiency of a lack of a signed MOU between environmental police, public health, and ourselves. I'm happy to report that that document exists. It is more than draft form. I would argue it's 99% done, and it's my understanding it's at legal for final review. So we'll be very happy to put that one to bed as soon as everybody's legal department passes off. And then the final issue that came out of the control of harvest, FDA was wondering if in our rainfall areas, if Mass Environmental Police had the ability to enforce closures in our rainfall areas in the absence of a legal notice. And make a long story short, some of our conditionally approved areas are rainfall areas. Through years of testing, we know that every time a half inch or more of rain falls in an area, water quality degrades, it needs to close, and it's generally clean 5 days later so it can pop back open. So we have a conditional area management plan with the town. Everybody's in agreement. When a half inch of rain falls in that area, and it could be any number, could be quarter inch, could be an inch and a half. When that threshold is met, the town automatically closes the area. They change the color of their flags. They flip the signs. They post it on their website, however they notify the public. And then it stays closed for 5 days, and it doesn't require a test to reopen. So MEP does have the ability to enforce rainfall closures without a legal notice. Any other time there's a closure, let's say porta potty went in the water down at Horseneck Beach, we would issue a legal notice. Of course, MEP can enforce any closure that's out in a legal notice. For these rainfall closure ones, we don't send a notice every time it rains. It's just an understanding, well spelled out, everybody agrees, so not a problem. And I think that might be it for me, Wayne.
All right, before we jump to the next item, I'm going to take a question from Mike DeVasto. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just the residential ice machine inspections. Is that going to be, because I imagine, every restaurant has ice machines on site, but they're inspected by the board, by the health agent or whatever it is. Would that be similar process where it would be like a local health agent that would be doing the inspections of the ice machine, or are they expecting the state to have to inspect those individually? There's a lot of residential ice machines that are used for harvest.
There are a lot. It's a bit of a hot potato. I'm not entirely sure who's going to be inspecting them. It could very well be myself and Alex and Gabe start making the rounds and looking at ice machines. I'm not entirely sure that's been determined yet. I believe that was a new and emerging concern, not a deficiency. It's not that it's absolutely wrong. It's, hey, if it's not been inspected, how do we know it's approved? We have to try to figure out a way to do that. Yep.
Okay. So with like HACCP, who approves those for like a HACCP facility?
I think public health does that. Maybe Alex or Chrissy can weigh in if I got that wrong, but it's my understanding public health
Like
inspects it.
DPH.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for Matt? Okay. I believe I'm next. So next slide. Okay, so this is something that DMF has been working on for several years now, and that's trying to tackle the issue of derelict fishing gear and to a lesser extent derelict aquaculture gear. Prior to this past December, state statute basically really hampered DMF's ability to do any type of to permit or allow any type of derelict fishing gear cleanup, whether that's in the water or on the beach, because basically state statutes that were put into place in the 1940s extended property rights to fishing gear, regardless of its disposition. And so in many cases, fishing gear or even just fishing gear debris, pieces of traps or rope or etc., pieces of net that wash up on the beach were protected under Mass General Law, Chapter 130, in Section 31 and 32. And so with that, with that issue, and also what we've seen with kind of increasing issues associated with derelict fishing gear washing up on the beach and in general being left in our coastal waters, DMF formed a kind of a derelict fishing gear task force that was comprised of obviously several members from DMF, including myself and Jared Silver and other staff members with expertise in our regulations and also derelict fishing gear. But also several industry members, including members of the Mass Lobstermen's Association, members from law enforcement, our legal department, legal counsel, and as well as members from NGOs like the Center for Coastal Study to basically to take a look and kind of describe the issue to form a white paper that we could then give to the legislature. And that effort was, I'm happy to report, was successful. We were able to, working with Senator Tarr, he introduced a bill to essentially change the state statutes that control derelict fishing gear. And with that, this past December, Chapter 130, Section 31 was amended and essentially differentiated fishing gear or intact fishing gear from fishing gear debris. And essentially, it exempts fishing gear debris from property laws under Mass General Law, Chapter 134. And then it rescinded Chapter 132, which was basically kind of the most difficult one where that we dealt with. It basically said that you can that only the owner of the gear or Mass Environmental Police could retrieve said gear, and then all those property laws and were conveyed onto that gear regardless of its disposition, and that it really hampered our ability to allow any type of beach cleanups and that thing. So that has now been changed, and DMF now has the authority to regulate derelict fishing gear removal. And so part of what we're working on now this spring is kind of coming up with kind of the regulatory framework for things like the who, what, where, and when of derelict gear removal. Why is this important to the shellfish industry? Well, part of this effort is also to look at derelict aquaculture gear. So next slide. And with that, we convened a kind of a subgroup of shellfish growers and local constables from several municipalities to solicit their feedback on the scope and scale of the derelict aquaculture gear issue in Massachusetts. And as we suspected, and not really any surprise to us, is that we learned that the scope and scale of derelict aquaculture gear is much smaller in magnitude than what we're dealing with derelict fishing gear, and that largely it seemed like many of the municipalities had pretty good either regulations in place or kind of procedures to on identifying and getting that gear back to the owner, and it didn't seem to pose as much of an issue. One of the things we also discuss is because there's a really large diversity of aquaculture gear, it makes it pretty impractical to define criteria for intact aquaculture gear versus aquaculture gear debris, which is what we did for fishing gear. For fixed fishing gear, there's common elements that make it pretty easy to make those distinctions, but aquaculture gear is so varied that would be fairly difficult to do. And the one real cogent point that came out of or one of the real cogent points that came out of the meeting that we had with that subgroup of folks was the importance of gear marking, and several municipalities, including Barnstable and Amy Croto, she shared Barnstable's regulations relative to this, and those were fairly helpful and serve as a fairly good model for other municipalities. But in Barnstable, it's they make it a requirement that any of the owner of the grant, that any gear that's moved off site, it's their responsibility to recover that gear. And also the critical feature, and this is one where I think moving forward, DMF would consider making this part of the regulations, is the requirement for all the gear to be well marked with the owner's information so that it can be attributable back to that in that gear. And that's especially important with aquaculture gear because in some cases the gear may wash up with fair amount of valuable products still in the bag or whatever that washes up. So clearly it would be important to make sure we can identify the owner. And so, I think that's really it. What we learned we had great feedback and attendance on that, and the discussion was great. It really kind of, confirmed our feelings that we probably don't need to do a great deal of rulemaking relative to derelict aquaculture gear. It seems like the municipalities really, for the most part, have it, have good procedures in place, and with the exception of maybe making a requirement for gear marking. And so that's the update there, and I'm happy to take any questions on this particular item. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on, and I'm going to turn it over to Wayne.
Thank you so much, Bob. I'd like to give a little introduction, particularly for our new members and participants, to this ongoing issue. For you veteran panel members, this has been an agenda item for going on 2 years before this committee and for the panel and at every one of our meetings. And we nested it within the DMF updates, I think strategically, because we made a lot of commitments at our November meeting, and those commitments are ongoing, and it's a little early to really report back from some of those commitments, so this is more of an update. I also want to recognize that several panel members said specifically we wanted to spend some time discussing this topic because it's been so big and impactful that we've set aside a large amount of time following my updates to have that conversation. And just again, to back up for those of you who might be new to this conversation, just to set the stage of what's happening here, and apologize for you who've heard this several times. Back in 2015 and 2017, the ISSC, for the first time, adopted very specific criteria on how to calculate the size of mandatory dilution zones around wastewater treatment outfalls. The ISSC has long required mandatory prohibited zones, but once those more specific criteria were established by the ISSC, we realized that some of our mandatory prohibited zones were too small. And as the FDA did their regular or routine audits around the Commonwealth in our growing areas affected by wastewater plants, we were being cited as being deficient in instances where our existing prohibited zones were too small. And because it takes so much work to overcome some of those requirements, we really only have the financial resources and capacity to tackle about one of these a year. DMF determined there are maybe about 12 plants throughout the Commonwealth that these new criteria could require the increase of these prohibited zones. And so for the last many years, we've been tackling these one or two at a time. This all started, and the first plant we tackled was the Scituate plant in the North and South Rivers, and we implement a new prohibited zone a few years back. Last year, we tackled New Bedford and Fairhaven, where this panel really got engaged. And the update for today is we're going through the list. You heard in November that we were cited by the FDA last year for a deficiency around the Ipswich plant. And so Ipswich and Dartmouth were on the FDA schedule for last year. And so Ipswich and Dartmouth are before us now. So since November, I'd love to provide an update on what's happening in Ipswich and Dartmouth. So as I said, in August, we were cited as a deficiency by the FDA when they did their annual peer for the Ipswich River, which is designated Shellfish Growing Area N5. And knowing this was coming, we contracted with Mass Dartmouth at SMAST to model the Ipswich plant, much like we did for the Scituate plant and the New Bedford and Fairhaven plants before it. We got those results this past January and February, and what you're seeing on the screen here is the results of that modeling effort, which designated the two dilution zones that we're most interested in, the 1,000-to-1, which is 1,000 gallons of clean water for every 1 gallon of effluent. The NSSP requires us to have a conditional zone up to 1,000-to-1 and assumes a prohibited zone out to the 1,000-to-1 unless we can overcome that with really good data. And that's why we undertake these modeling efforts. And we are allowed to get below the 1,000-to-1 to an absolute floor in the NSSP of 320-to-1, which is the lowest you can go to protect against deleterious and poisonous substances. So with good data, good modeling, and a good plant, most importantly, you can reduce the base criteria of 1,000-to-1 dilution to the 320. And what you're seeing here is the output in Ipswich. So the red here is the 1,000-to-1, is the 320-to-1 minimum. And that area under the NSSP needs to be prohibited permanently to shellfish harvesting. Beyond that, in the blue is the 1,000-to-1 dilution, which has to be conditional based on wastewater treatment plant performance. Now, the impact for those of you who are familiar with the North Shore of this new red area, it's about triple the size of the prohibited area we previously had. So it's been quite impactful to fishers in the Ipswich River area N5. As Dan indicated, it's really taking a lot of our bandwidth, rolling this out to the community, talking about mitigation and what we might be able to do about this. But we reclassified based on this modeling effort, and currently this area shown in red is the new prohibited zone in Ipswich. Beyond that, in the 1,000-to-1, thankfully, the adjacent areas of N4 to the north and N6 to the south here, off of Crane Beach and inside Plum Island, we already had classified as conditional for the wastewater treatment plant. So the end results was really no significant changes to those areas because, like I said, we were already sufficient in terms of our conditional criteria in our camps or conditional area management plans for those areas. So thankfully, there were no additional impacts in terms of the conditional classification.
Hey,
As I
Wayne,
said,
could I just ask you to clarify a little bit based on what is in the model ordinance relative to guidance? And I think when you indicated when you were speaking, you said that that the 1,000-to-1 was conditional. It was my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that the FDA guidance or the NSSP guidance rather is that it be prohibited out to 1,000-to-1. Is that? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and thank you for that clarity. I probably misspoke or oversimplified that, but the standard in the guidance portion of the manual is that all areas around wastewater treatment plants are prohibited out to 1,000-to-1, unless you can overcome that with data and studies, and there's this list of criteria how you must perform those. And that's really what guides and drives our use of the SMAS model, because that's could potentially inform and produce the data where you're allowed to go below the 1,000-to-1 base criteria. And again, you're allowed to go below between the 1,000, but not below the 320. Does that clarify it, Bob? Terrific. And as I said earlier, we've also been doing Dartmouth at the same time we did Ipswich, and the Dartmouth modeling is just about finished. Preliminary results there, unlike Ipswich, is, we think, good news. And the reason for that is the Dartmouth outfall is offshore, unlike at the head of the estuary like it was here in Ipswich, where at low tide, there's really no dilution at all. Fortunately, in Dartmouth, the modeling has showed that the plume pretty much stays offshore. There aren't many active fisheries there. And although it's very preliminary, we don't have the final results. We think the Dartmouth model outputs will be encouraging and much less impactful, if at all, to active shell fisheries. A couple other final notes here. At November, we committed to doing additional sampling around New Bedford and Fairhaven. Thanks to Sea Grant and Josh, who's part of the panel, we were able to deploy a tryptophan sensor, and that deployment took place this week. And we're now doing additional testing to really determine the impacts and how the sewage releases from CSOs might impact shell fishing around the Dartmouth area. And I just really want to point out, because it's been very confusing even to us internally, with regard to the wastewater treatment outfalls, we've only conducted this advanced modeling around sewer plant outfalls. With regard to CSOs, it's a completely different situation. We are not modeling those. We're just using the best tools available under the NSSP to evaluate where those discharges go, because we're required to close any impacted shellfish areas through the release of any untreated or treated sewage. And it's been very confusing that the CSO impacts and the wastewater impacts, unfortunately, the new criteria have been rolled out on a parallel level. So there's been a lot of conflation of those two issues. So again, I just want to emphasize, we're only modeling wastewater treatment outfalls. We're using the old standard traditional NSSP tools to evaluate the impact around CSOs. And that's where the additional testing, the sensor comes into play, so we can hopefully map where those CSO plumes go in regard to shellfish resources. And the reason why it's been rolled out on a parallel track is that there was a new state law passed that required public notification of CSO discharges for the very first time. So we only became aware of the extent and the scale of some of the CSOs around the Commonwealth after the passage of that new law. And unfortunately, it's been rolled out on a parallel track, so there's been a lot of confusion there. And then finally, the last bullet on the slide is we have engaged with Hui Sea Grant as well to conduct a peer review of the SMAS model. And that peer review is underway, and it's really quite far along. They've engaged independent experts around the country outside of areas impacted by this modeling, just so it can be independent and really objective. And their goal is to really fast track this analysis. And so we're hoping, as maybe as early as this spring, to have results of the peer review of this model we're using around the state. Bob, I'll end there with this one topic, but I might suggest that I continue on with my two other slides, and then maybe after open it up to discussion, because I know several panel members are interested in talking about this topic further. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, but one thing though, before you just move on quickly, Wayne, I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit, Wayne or Matt, jump in here and elaborate on exactly what the tryptophan sensor is for. And just to be clear, that relates specifically to the CSO issue, correct? Do you want to elaborate a little bit on what we're hoping to do with that?
That's correct. And Matt, please chime in here. I'll give a real overview, because we have one up here on the North Shore up in the Merrimack River. So what it does is it basically is a fluorescent unit that is deployed out in the environment in a buoy, tethered usually to a dock or moored. And it's an electronic sampler, and it really can detect through tryptophan the presence of fecal coliform bacteria. And you can set it to take a sample on any period, And so what it does is allow us, rather than the old-fashioned labor-intensive way of dipping a water bottle, bringing it back to the laboratory and getting results 24 hours later, we can get results all the time through this technology. And the one up here in the Merrimack has been really effective. And what we're trying to do with the one down in New Bedford area is use that to try to track how the CSO effluent plume moves around the coast. And this sensor will be much more effective than us out there all the time dipping bottles. It'll really be, we think, grab some data. And Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, thank you, Wayne. That was an excellent summary. So we did deploy our tryptophan sensor last Friday, and we are taking all sorts of water samples. We started Friday. Chrissy went in on Sunday. We've sampled every single day this week. Our sensor is hung on the SMAS dock right outside our building. We're hoping that it will detect the signals from CSO activations when a CSO releases. Some of the things that could be trouble with that are that SMAS dock is also less than a half of a mile from the outfall pipe for the New Bedford wastewater treatment plant, which also could be releasing tryptophan and fluorescence. So will it be able to detect the CSO signal from the background noise? That's the big question. Fortunately, Josh and his group were able to rent this device for a month. We deployed it Friday, knowing we were going to have a big storm event over the weekend. So fantastic. We have pre-storm samples, and we got samples every single day, including the stormy day. And we're hoping to calibrate and ground truth fecal and MSC water samples that we're collecting daily with the results, the data that the device is collecting. We have not downloaded it yet. I actually meant to email Josh today. We're hoping to do that early next week with Josh or someone from his team. And that'll be our first look at what's coming out of that sensor. So it's a bit unknown, but we're hopeful that we will be able to detect that signal and use that information moving forward.
Right, and the premise behind that is that what you're working on right now is essentially validating the methodology to be able to see whether or not we can use those tryptophan sensors to help manage the scope, scale, and timing of CSO closures, and by being able to deploy, if they do work and they are capable of detecting that, what we hope we'd be able to deploy them on a broader scale to help manage that. Correct, Matt?
That's correct. That's an accurate assessment. We would put one in Dartmouth to the affected grants over there, and one over in Fairhaven as well. The other grants that are routinely affected by these mandatory closures when raw sewage is released. So if we can say where it is going and where it isn't going, and it isn't going there, but it's going out there, that definitely helps us determine the footprint and scale of these closures. Absolutely.
Right. But we got to validate it first. Yep.
Yes. Lots of work to be done.
Great. Thanks, guys. Okay, Wayne, thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to, I think folks will be interested in that. And while you were on that point, I just wanted to highlight it. So go ahead. Go.
Absolutely. So next slide, and next two will be quicker. This just really shows the reclassification of the Ipswich closure. So we unfortunately lost about 500 acres of productive, primarily soft shell and razor clam habitat due to this closure, shown here in the red. And the other impact shown in blue for those you veterans of classification in our color coding of the coast. The blue is a conditionally approved area. N4 to the north was previously conditionally approved, so no change there. But N6.0 offshore of Crane Beach, most of that was straight approved. And because of the modeling effort, we just changed that to conditionally approved. Not much shellfishing happens there, so there's really no impact there. Next slide. The other big issue we've been wrestling with, and this panel has had an update on, I would say, the last 3 meetings, is our depuration fishery. For those of you new to the panel, DMF has managed a depuration fishery for this year, the 100th year anniversary from when this program began. And depuration really is allowed under the NSSP for what we call casually as moderately contaminated areas or technically restricted areas. So it's an area that's impacted by a moderate amount of contamination. And under the NSSP, you're allowed to do two things with shellfish in those areas. They can be depurated, which is a controlled process in a plant, or they can be relayed to an approved or conditionally approved area. And so we've operated a depuration facility on Plum Island for many, many years. DMF took over a plant back in the 1960s from a plant that was first built by the city of Newburyport for the Merrimack River. Many of you know that in November of 2023, our depuration plant was shut down suddenly due to a coastal storm which destroyed our seawater system. And then that following winter, our plant itself was flooded due to coastal storms. Many of you know that Plum Island really is at the forefront of sea level rise and erosion, and the beach upon which the plant sits is really subject to erosion. And so what we did is two things in response. We've have about 30 or 40 participants in this fishery, fishing not only the Merrimack River, but the Pines River and Saugus and Revere, and all of Greater Boston Harbor are the primary depuration areas. So it was quite impactful on this legacy fishery. We immediately commissioned a study to evaluate the feasibility of bringing the plant back online. And we also got approval to provide a financial relief program for the fishers that were put out of work. Last year, and you heard this all in November, the study basically said it's really not feasible to restore the plant. One, it's very expensive. Secondly, the fishery has declined significantly, that the cost benefit isn't really there for that investment. But most importantly, the study concluded that the site is so vulnerable, it really is not feasible to maintain depuration at that location because it's rapidly disappearing. What we then did is we worked with a nearby depuration facility known as Spinney Creek, right over the border in Elliott, Maine, which is really only an additional 20-minute drive from our Newburyport facility if you don't get off the exit on Route 95. So that delta is only an additional 20 minutes. And we were able to, thanks to work with Maine and the state of New Hampshire, as well as our Department of Public Health, come up with a program that would allow Massachusetts moderately contaminated shellfish to utilize this alternative facility. And moreover, we were able to secure funding to subsidize the cost differential between utilizing our plant and the Spinney Creek plant. And that was all the costs: travel time, mileage, the hourly rate of the driver of the truck, and the additional rack fees to use this facility. And I'm happy to report that the depuration fishery has come back online since our November meeting. And right now, shown here on the right, is the Merrimack estuary. That's the first estuary to come online. And so we have a master digger who's now employed 18 subordinates, and they're now actively using the Spinney Creek depuration facility to reopen this fishery. We're currently working with masters and potentially new masters that might enter the program to utilize the other restricted areas in the Pines River and Greater Boston Harbor. So in this area of negative news with regard to wastewater effluent, we're really pleased to save this fishery and to get it back online and hopefully grow it. It's really been successful. Spinney Creek loves the Massachusetts clams. They're doing really well in their plant in terms of depuration efficacy. The fishers up in the Merrimack are really pleased. They say the product is first class, and the shucking houses that are receiving this product, and no, I don't want to disparage our own facility, but they're saying they look even better than the clams that came out of our plant. So we're cautiously optimistic this legacy fishery can be sustained and maybe even enhanced going forward. Next slide. we don't have a slide to talk about the last item here, but as many of you know, all of the participants in the NSSP in Massachusetts typically attend 2 regional and national efforts that governs the program and makes adjustments to the NSSP each year. One is what's called NESA, an acronym for the Northeast Shellfish Sanitation Association, which is a consortium of the New England states, New York and New Jersey. We all gather, all shellfish specialists, public health specialists, and the FDA gather for that regional group every year. This year's meeting is in a couple of weeks in New York on Long Island, and we'll be tackling a lot of the traditional issues there. Also, we're unfortunately just heard that the FDA, our real big partner, which leads a big training at every NESA meeting, is unable to attend because of the uncertainty at the federal level right now that Dan talked about at the beginning of this meeting. So we're really going to miss them. This year, though, also is an ISSC convention. For those of you who don't know, the ISSC governs the National Shellfish Sanitation Program, and it meets every other year to consider changes to the program. This year, the ISSC is scheduled to meet in Denver, Colorado, if you can believe that, in October. And we're hopeful that FDA might be able to attend that. But again, there's just so much change. And I noticed on the call, our only member of the ISSC Executive Board from Massachusetts, Eric Hickey, who works for the Department of Public Health, might have a lot more updates because this issue has been moving really daily. And if I could put you on the spot, Eric, to update the group on any new changes, what to NESA or the ISSC. Are you still there, Eric?
Yes, I am.
I think he's still there. Yeah, why don't you give him a briefing, Eric?
Hi, my name is Eric Hickey. I'm the Assistant Director of the Division of Food Protection Program at the Department of Public Health. And currently I serve as the Region 1 Regulatory Representative to the ISSC Executive Board. So I have some information I can share with the group on 2 issues. First is NESA. Wayne is correct. FDA has indicated to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, which is the agency that's hosting this year's NESA conference. They've indicated that they will not be able to participate. And that's unfortunate because FDA usually provides 2 training modules for each NESA meeting. One usually is concerning growing area or lab issues, and then the other training often is with plant sanitation, Vibrio control, and they try to cover all aspects of the cooperative program. So they will not be participating. It's created a 4.5-hour gap for Deborah Barnes, who is the current president of NESA. She's the chief at the Bureau of Shell Fisheries at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So she's put out a call to the member states for presentations. And NESA consists of the New England coastal states plus New York. A few people have stepped up. One is Bryant Lewis, who's actually my alternate to the executive board. And he works for the Maine Department of Marine Resources as a growing area program supervisor. And so he will be presenting on the Maine Campylobacter outbreak associated with oysters that occurred this past summer. So like I said, membership is stepping up. Deborah is hoping to have, a high quality meeting consistent with the last couple of meetings. I think, we'll be able to achieve that goal as an organization. And that meeting is going to be on April 2nd and April 3rd in Riverhead, New York. There is still time to register if anyone is interested. I also have some additional news on the ISSC biennial meeting, which is scheduled for October in Denver, Colorado. This has been sort of a day-to-day situation. As an executive board member, I did reach out to the ISSC executive office last week, and they are having an emergency meeting next week
to decide whether or not they're going to be able to have the biennial meeting in October. It costs almost about $300,000 to put this on. And the ISSC did sign a contract with the hotel, the Denver Inverness, and the first quarter payment is due on April 8th. And that is due for the period between when they signed the agreement, which was a couple of months ago, up to April 8th. And that they require a 25% deposit, which would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $72,000. So the ISSC Executive Office, which includes the current executive chair, Michael Bott from Delaware, and Keith Skiles, who is the executive director, have decided to petition or gather the executive board to decide whether or not we're going to have this conference. And as Region 1 representative, I have polled my counterparts in other states. I've spoken to Deborah Barnes as well. She's the Region 2 regulatory representative. I've spoken to folks in Rhode Island like Brenda Lee Viveros from their Department of Public Health, David Borkman from their Department of Environmental Management. I've even spoken to Lori Howell, the owner of Spinney Creek Shellfish. She serves as the Industry 1 regional Region 1 rep. And the general consensus is nobody wants to move forward with this meeting if FDA is unable to participate. And two issues, that concern the conference. One is we're not sure when FDA will be allowed to engage with the ISSC, specifically continuing with committee work. Committees are still meeting, but without FDA, NOAA, and EPA members. FDA has to concur with any proposals that are accepted at this conference. And so it presents some unique, potential problems if the committees do submit proposals and we get to the ISSC conference, and whether or not FDA participates, whether they concur with these proposals. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is, the current continuing resolution is going to end in September, the funding for the federal government. And so there's concerns that we'll be right back in the same place we were last week. And, the potential that there is a government shutdown and FDA will not be able to participate. By that time, we'll be in the fourth quarter of our payments. And so if there is a cancellation, or the FDA cannot participate and we want to cancel the conference, then we lose the entire conference fee. So as I said, it looks like our New England members are favoring postponement. The upshot of this is there isn't a whole lot of urgent issues that need to be dealt with, like in past conferences going back, say, 10 years ago with Vibrio control, issues like that. It would also give the committees some additional time to meet and conduct business. Like many organizations, the pandemic took a toll on the ISSE and set us back on some of our committee work. So it would give a little bit of time for committees to continue to prepare for the next biennial meeting, whenever that is. And sort of the discussion that members are having is maybe pushing it out as far as a year and doing this in October of 2026. But again, this issue will not be settled until next week when they have their emergency executive board meeting.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, so for the panel, another reason this is relevant is one of the objectives of having the Shellfish Advisory Panel is to come to you in advance of the ISSC meeting and let you know what the issues are that could be voted on if you wanted to weigh in yourselves or give us guidance. So that's something that if we don't have the meeting, then we wouldn't have to bring that agenda item forward at like a September or October meeting.
Eric, go ahead.
And, I think Dan makes a great point, and related to that, the call for proposals begins on May 6th, and that extends to June 20th, of 2025. And so, some of what's going on in terms of the pause with committees is going to impact that proposal period. And a lot of work goes into these proposals. Many of them, are submitted with attachments, particularly proposals that are going through task force 3, which deals with lab issues and lab methods. So already we're about 2 months behind on some of the conference preparation. So this is something else that will be considered in next week's discussion.
Thank you
Great
so
idea.
much, Eric, for adding a lot more detail and flavor to the updates on NESA and ISSC. Really grateful. Bob, back to you. And I think some panel members might have some questions about the DMF updates and maybe particularly some of the last few slides.
Sure thing. Thanks, Wayne. Very good. And so, panel members, anyone who have any questions overall on any of the elements of the DMF update? Dale, you're recognized.
Thank you, Bob. I just wanted to give you a few updates on some of the other activities that have been going on surrounding the application of the model and the CSO issue. In terms of the application of the model, thanks, Wayne, for mentioning that it is undergoing a peer review now. I just wanted to go on record as saying that I thought the application of the model for regulatory purposes was really premature, and that we really need to look at verification and ground truthing of that model before it can be used for actually impacting our resources. On the CSO issue, we have been looking at the model ordinance and trying to determine whether there are ways that we can adjust or modify the standards set forth by the model ordinance for rainfall closures. And so under that task, we have been working with the Marine Policy Center at the Roger Williams University Law School, and they have gone through a legal review of the model ordinance in terms of its ability to be adapted for specific situations. And to that end, a final report is imminent. It's gone out for internal and external review, and the attorney that's working on it, Alex Tamburino, is in the final stages of a final draft, and that will be released probably within the next couple of weeks. But just to give you a little preliminary on what some of the results are coming from her analysis, is that there is the concept of a conditional area management plan. And Alex has suggested that that may be an alternative way of managing both the closures due to CSOs as well as the potentially the conditional area standards for rainfall. And so I would like to propose that the Shellfish Advisory Panel put together a subcommittee to look at the development of a conditional area management plan for Nascatucket Bay. I think we have a very good background of information we have been able to get from Division of Marine Fisheries, fecal coliform data for Nascatucket Bay back to 1988. And we're in the process of trying to correlate that with rainfall to look at whether there are predictable levels of fecal coliform exposure being generated under specific rainfall conditions. The CSO reporting is a little bit newer, and we do not have as much information, but I still have been able to determine that there is some predictability in terms of extent of rainfall versus CSO output. So again, I think that opens a door for us to actually scrutinize the closure conditions and how rainfall may be impacting that. So I'd like to see a subcommittee put together to explore that possibility. And if it should come to the conclusion that it is a reasonable way of approaching it, then I would like that committee to then continue on with the actual development of a conditional area management plan. So I will throw that on the floor and see what people think.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Dan.
Yeah, so Dale, is it the role of a subcommittee of this panel to look at that, or do you want the DMF staff to roll up its sleeves and to deal with the nuts and bolts of the model ordinance and FDA?
Well, my understanding of development of a camp is that it's a joint effort between industry and regulatory entities. So I thought it was probably a very good application for the Shellfish Advisory Panel to be involved.
Okay. All right. So I guess, unfortunately, Chrissy is not on the call at this point, but, oh, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Dan, if you don't
I'll take it
mind.
back to Bob.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Okay. So, you know, a conditional area management plan is in place anytime there's an area that doesn't meet the minimum or that exceeds the threshold for some portion of the year, and it needs to be predictable. So an area can be conditional because in the winter months, there's migratory birds, there's fecal coliform elevated levels. It has to close for those winter months. Like so many systems, river systems down the Cape, in the summer months, the warm water, high bacteria counts, they reproduce, fecal counts are up in the summer, we close those in the summertime. I think what Dale is referring to is the way Rhode Island has handled some of their CSO events in the Providence River. But there are some pretty significant differences between what's happening in New Bedford and what's happening in the Providence River. So it's our understanding and our interpretation, and certainly FDA's interpretation, that when untreated sewage is released into the marine environment, a closure must happen. And it's stated that it needs to be a 21-day closure with the possibility of testing using a tool called MSC, male specific coliphage testing, after the 7th day to confirm that levels are at background or below the threshold, which is labeled as 50. So that's how we've been treating CSO activations in and around New Bedford, now that we know how much is coming out, how often they're happening. Rhode Island has it a little bit different. Rhode Island, we've learned, only has 5 CSOs, and the number really doesn't matter, right? It's about volumes released of untreated. But Rhode Island CSOs are all located right next to it's either 2 or 3 treatment plants on the Providence River. And we've also learned that Rhode Island treats CSO releases with chlorine. So there's some level of treatment there. In the absence of any treatment, straight raw sewage is 1.4 million fecals per 100 ml. If we had no information of what was coming out of the New Bedford CSOs, we would have to use the number 1.4 million per 100 ml and dilute that down to 14. 14 is the standard. That's a big, big, big way to go. So we don't use 1.4. We've sampled the pipes. We dunk the bottles in the pipes when they're flowing. It's awful. I invite anybody to come join us anytime you want to see what these are all about. And what we've determined is that generally it's around the 400,000 fecal per 100 ml. So that's the number we use in our dilution calculator. That means we need less water to dilute that much fecal instead of the 1.4 million, which means ultimately a smaller footprint closed. Rhode Island, because they chlorinate at the CSOs, I believe that Dave Borkman has said that they can use down to 100,000. So that would only be 25% of the footprint of our current closures if we could go that low, if the city of New Bedford was, if there was any level of treatment prior to being released into the marine environment, and it's simply not happening in New Bedford. So, and there is a significant prohibited area up in the Providence River, and it might just be that that large prohibited area holds enough water to dilute the CSO activations that are happening in that river, especially using the lower fecal coliform counts. I don't know, I'd have to confirm that, but it's a better scenario there than it is in New Bedford, which is zero treatment, simply mixing with stormwater runoff. And while Dale's right, these activations largely happen during rain events. We can almost guarantee they're going to happen during rain events. We can also show that they happen during dry weather. So there's some level of predictability there. I concede that, but it's not that great, the predictability. It can be all over the place. We can have massive discharges on a 1/4 inch of rain and discharges half the size on 3/4 of an inch of rain, or we could have in the middle of a 10-day dry stretch an activation and 2 million gallons goes out. So in order to have a conditional area and a conditional area management plan, the issues that affect that area need to be predictable and defined and well understood. And I'm not entirely sure we're there yet. This is all up for debate, Dale. I would agree with you. We should continue to look at this, as you know we are. We did weigh in on that report from Alex that'll be coming out, and I look forward to reading the final copy. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I don't disagree with you, but what I'm saying is I think it needs to be discussed more in depth. And so I think that this panel is one of the forums that would be appropriate for that. So again, I would ask for us to put together a group to explore the possibility. I'm not saying that the end result is going to be a camp, but I am saying that we need to at least explore it and work through it and see if we can use that as a means of better managing these discharges, or maybe not. It may come back that it's not appropriate at all, but I'd like to see it explored a little bit more in depth.
So, question for you, Dale. I guess I'm trying to understand process-wise the sequence of events here, and so my understanding that prior to going to down the road of a camp, I think we need to kind of resolve the legal issues behind what the model ordinance, dictates relative to the guidance section versus the shall section. And from our perspective, it's been that the closures related to CSOs are not in the guidance section. They're in the things that we are obligated to implement. And so I guess what I'm interested in seeing is the legal analysis that you're talking about, and I wonder, does it make sense prior to convening a group of this panel to kind of get that information out, have our legal folks take a look at it, and let us, DMF, at least develop kind of get a sense of what it says and develop what our position is. I'd hate to go down the road of starting to develop a conditional area management plan if folks at DMF and DPH have a different interpretation. I guess I don't know. I'm just wondering if there needs to be some sequencing there.
Yeah, you say sequencing, I say stalling. I think that we have enough information, or within the next month or 2 months, we're going to have enough information so that we can at least start to make some kind of determination as to whether a camp is appropriate or not.
Okay, but at the end of the day, as a Shellfish Management Authority, Dale, we're the ones who have to essentially concur with that legal advice, and so I just want to make sure that, um, you know, we haven't seen it yet. I mean, we've reviewed. I know Shellfish staff has reviewed the preliminary, but we have not pushed that up to our legal staff or had an opportunity to make sure that, we feel that we haven't seen the analysis. So I'd want to, have some comfort that we're on board prior to agreeing to starting to develop a camp. So, I mean, I don't think that's delaying. I think that's just due diligence.
But Bob, I'm not saying that this is starting to develop a camp. I'm saying that this committee is exploring the possibility of developing a camp. And part of that exploration is legal opinion from your attorney staff, and as well as the data analysis that we're undergoing as we speak, to look at whether we can determine there is some predictability. We can determine to some extent what the health risk is from those discharge events, and
Right.
whether it's appropriate for us to consider having a camp or not.
Okay.
Bill, what components of our panel were you thinking of asking to join this subcommittee?
I had not really put that together. The only other individual that I would consider is we're currently having the fecal data and rainfall data being analyzed since 1988 with Sarah Donnellan over at UMass Dartmouth. And she is going through an analysis process now and has sent me some preliminary information, but she would be obviously a good technical resource for this. But other than that, I hadn't really put together any preconceived members of the panel.
Okay.
Go ahead, Seth.
Thank you. A lot of good information here. So with my Mass Aquaculture Association hat on, the last meeting, we obviously didn't get a chance to update this. We've got a good update today. Several things just jumped through my mind, and obviously with the whole expansion of the Ipswich situation, and I believe that there are a lot of wild harvesters or commercial fishermen that are doing that, let alone the aqua farmers that have been impacted by this. So I don't know if this is a Dan or a Wayne or a Matt question. So that particular industry is being impacted. We've been talking about this for 6 months, and Dale has gone out of his way to incorporate and get maybe a different interpretation from a different legal source. And that's the whole issue with legality, is everybody has a different interpretation. But I guess my question, and I'll start maybe with Dan, is, so here we are 6 months down this road. What is your group doing to help the bigger picture of the CSOs, and a simple thing of possibly how do us shellfish farmers get to relocate? Here suddenly there's a whole new set of rules, and how can we relocate our farm or close the farm down? What has the division looked into things like that? I know it's a town issue, but it's a state law that's been changed that's now impacting, and apparently impacting more and more, both commercial and shellfish farmers about that. So that's one question I have. And then another thing that we were, and Dale can probably explain this a little bit better, but we were up at the Mass Ag Day yesterday or 2 days ago and talking with the politicians up there. And apparently there's 3 House bills, 1046, 1031, and 1012, that are looking to reduce CSOs in other cities and other parts of Massachusetts. And I guess, could the Division of Marine Fisheries be encouraging New Bedford to be getting into this bill and finding the money and trying to come up with a plan And then finally, obviously, with the news that Eric Hickey just said, that potentially if the ISSC isn't meeting, I mean, that would have been where we're going to start to introduce a possible solution 2 years later for this. And if they're not going to meet, then who knows when that might be. So I know that's a convoluted thing, but what can this committee that's been formed can do to help out this particular part of the industry? Thanks.
I don't know where to start. So there's a lot of questions there. So, you know, we're obviously working to, you know, as Matt has mentioned, you know, trying to learn more about these CSOs and where these things are affecting shellfish. I'm not opposed to doing a deeper dive on Dale's request. I guess we could include the DPH folks and maybe the DEP folks as well. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of this panel, is to, especially with the representation from some of the other state agencies. As far as CSO funding, that's I'm not aware of that. I didn't attend Ag Day, but it's certainly something that we could bring to the attention of the folks in my department.
Go ahead, Michael. You're recognized.
I'll put my hand up. I heard DPH. It would help me to understand and frame this if to understand it's been a long time since I looked at the enabling statute for this body. Is there a motion in front of the voting delegates that has been made? Has it been made by someone, a subcommittee member who can make a motion? It also helps because motions actually define the question, and then that motion usually gets seconded, discussed. So is there a motion that defines what this subcommittee would do? Report back? Basically, I mean, that basically put it in a box, structure it.
Sure. So yeah, Dale is a panel member. Dale could make a motion. I think what he was doing, and Dale, jump in at any point if I'm mischaracterizing what you said, but you're basically making a friendly recommendation to this committee to convene a working group to look at the issue of CSOs in the greater New Bedford area, and then put potential to use a camp to manage those issues. He didn't make a formal motion, but certainly, I guess, Jared, relative to how this operates, would we need that to create a formal sub-working group?
Generally, when we've developed subgroups of this panel before, it's just done on a volunteer basis. Involving panel members who have relevant expertise and interest, either on a volunteer or a voluntold, basis. We haven't really moved to do motions. This isn't generally a voting body with that type of, voting authority. So we've tried to avoid that, and instead do things kind of on a cooperative basis.
But to Mike Moore's point, it might be valuable to delineate exactly what this the subcommittee is going to address. And I look to Matt Camisa to help sort of frame that relative to the classification.
Well, so I think what the issue is here is that for those of you that don't speak the classification terminology of our shellfish day-to-day world, we manage areas. Every growing area is routinely sampled 5 times a year. When it's in the open status, that's the minimum number of samples. So when an emergency happens, we have to we have to respond to that emergency with an emergency closure. That's our interpretation of the model ordinance and what we are required to do for public health. I believe what Dale is maybe considering, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, is instead of every time a CSO releases, don't blow the whistle and send out a notice saying mandatory 21-day closure, but let's treat it as oh, we're going to get a ½ inch of rain. Usually when we get a ½ inch of rain, this much CSO goes out. And so we'll make a closure this big, and usually those could be done on like 5 days. A rainfall area, if you exceed the rainfall threshold for a rainfall area, the area closes for 5 days and then it pops open. I believe what Dale's trying to maybe get at, the possibility, is that we don't treat CSO activations as an emergency, but treat it as a rainfall event. It closes for 5 days and then opens.
That is one option for sure. And that would certainly be a better option than what we have now. Because
Okay.
at this point, as an industry person, that there is no, I have no capacity to predict when these are going to happen. You know, we may have a ½ an inch rain one day and not have a closure, and then have a ¼ an inch rain and potentially have a closure. And there is certain level of predictability in terms of what the CSOs are putting out based on rainfall, based on the analysis that I've done. And so I think that element of predictability lends itself to the development of a conditional area management plan. But I wouldn't say that definitively. I think that's something that needs to be explored and discussed. So
right,
yeah.
it could certainly be looked at, and I know there's a whole history of water quality data that came out of Nascatucket Bay that was provided to you. But what I would suggest to the group is that we sampled Nascatucket Bay 5 times a year. Do we really think that we have characterized water quality in Nascatucket Bay with 5 samples in a year when there are CSO activations happening? How many were there? 400, 500 CSO activations? I mean, you'd have to sample all the time to be able to say that data shows that nothing ever goes over there. 5 times a year simply doesn't meet that threshold.
We have over 40 years of 5 times a year.
We do, except that you would also have to correlate that to when the CSO activations occurred, where they happened, how much came out, and that information is not available because until 18 months ago, we didn't even know how much was coming out. No one knew. All they knew was the wooden block fell off the concrete wall underground. So I think it's a bit of a stretch. I'm not sure that data will tell us what we would need in order to call Nascatucket Bay a rainfall area to deal with New Bedford CSOs. So I think that's where the difference in interpretation is. It's really unfortunate that Chrissy had to jump off the call early, and I would encourage that we bring her in on this conversation at our earliest convenience.
And I would agree, and that's all the more reason why we should develop a working group so we can sit down and talk about this.
Yeah, no doubt Chrissy and I will be on it. And happy to be a part of it.
I would certainly hope so.
Happy to be a part of it.
Josh, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just want to add that, part of a working group could look at what data is needed to reach this conditional area management plan, and sort of look ahead and see what resources are needed to put together what makes DMF and FDA comfortable to set up a camp for the area. So it doesn't have to be decided upon as a camp right now, but explore what would be needed to get there. So
okay, so we're running short on meeting time here. I think there's definitely interest among panel members to convene some type of a subgroup to further discuss this issue. as I mentioned, DMF has some concerns about sequencing and timing of this, but nonetheless, given the importance of this, I think there's an opportunity for us to start with a meeting and kind of lay out the issue and hopefully bring forth the legal analysis Dale was talking about. So with that, is there, I guess the question is do we need to form a formal subgroup right now, or do we need to put a meeting of all the principals on the calendar to discuss it? Maybe it doesn't matter. That maybe.
I'd just like to know on the panel, who's interested in joining that discussion?
That would be me.
Of course, right. So, but my point is, we could have a meeting with you, Dale. But I don't know what the interest level is beyond you. I mean, maybe Eric, for sure, Eric Hickey from DPH or Mike Moore. But who among the other panel members are interested in joining this conversation?
I could join, certainly looking at sort of the sensors we're putting out and what data could be,
Sure.
sort of leveraged to put towards it.
And I saw Seth raised his hand as well.
Okay. Is there anyone else among the panel?
This is Sean Bowen. I'm certainly not an expert in water quality, but I do speak the language of classification, and I'd be happy to be on the panel as well.
Okay. All right. And
All right.
will the DPH folks pledge to get involved in this discussion?
Yeah, well, just as I said, because I'm not quite sure of since I'm representing the commissioner's office, I'm not quite sure of the implications. If we could hold off until maybe you have your first meeting, if you could give us a little more structure as to what you're expecting, then it may be Eric. I mean, if you're talking about CSOs, there's other people in the department that may want to get involved in that. So if I could that's why I was looking for like a motion. If there's some clear guidance and structure, I can bring it back rather than just having the two Shellfish authorities in the room at the same time. So if you're doing like sort of a fact-finding discussion, we trust your judgment. If you want to report back to us, we could make a decision if we want to sit in on it or what people we'd want to bring with us. There may be, if it's sewage outflow, there may be people in DEP that would have some expertise in this.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, though, the specific question, Mike, is really, it kind of focuses back on how we're applying the model ordinance to classification around CSOs. And so it's pretty refined. I mean, if I may be so bold to suggest, I don't know if anybody who has more expertise in that arena than Eric, so it would certainly be helpful to have him there relative to those interpretation, and maybe from there we could develop at the first meeting, develop some broader questions. We could then serve them up to you to bring, possibly bring in other expertise. That would be okay.
Again, I'd still like to check back. I mean, because I know we talk about shellfish harvest areas in these meetings, but Department of Public Health interests in NSSP is, of course, all the shellfish dealers. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I'm reluctant to commit DPH involvement in a subcommittee without a little more information, but we'd love to hear more about it. Why don't you get some facts together? And I know that I saw that legal interpretation, that recommendation. I haven't shared that with my legal office yet. It's just that there's a lot more industry than just harvesters involved in this discussion for any decisions that are made associated with the model ordinance.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Seth.
Yeah, I mean, I know that a perfect example is obviously the depuration plant went down. That impacted a certain industry. And, the state went and made adjustments and got involved with Spinney Creek, which is great. And I know your office, Dan, and Chrissy and Matt, your guys are doing a great job at going out and doing extra sampling. So, folks in Dartmouth and in and Fairhaven can get open. And, you know, we're kind of using, I feel that this is kind of a test case, but there are going to be other sewage treatment plants. And it sounds like it's good news for Dartmouth that because the pipe is far enough offshore and at the mouth of the bay, that's really not going to impact anybody. But it still leaves the aquaculturists that if suddenly you're closed and you're only open half of the year, that our hands are tied and we can't necessarily move or it doesn't appear to be that we can move the oyster farm for the person. But I'm just wondering what other avenues are being explored to either push back or interpret a law. You know, you get 10 lawyers in a room, they're going to all interpret things a little differently. But, you know, what other direction that we might be able to go in with all the talent that's on this committee to help address the concerns here.
I don't know, Seth. I mean, these are complicated issues, and I'm certainly not going to do anything that's going to risk the statewide shellfish industry and get taken off the interstate shippers list and be found out of compliance with the model ordinance. But, you know, we're willing to continue the conversation. As far as moving municipal farms, I mean, that's not something that the DMF has any authority to do. So I'm not sure what the question is there relative to.
I understand that it's the state laws that are impacting the municipal shellfish farmers. That's like asking a dairy cow farmer to, you know, he owns his land in his town, but if the state came down and closed it, I'm just saying it's with the multiple levels of permitting to get a oyster farm or a shellfish farm, and then suddenly to have the rug pulled out from under you and have it only open half of the time, it changes the rules. And then potentially, if we suddenly have farmers that are going out of business, you look at what the dairy industry does. That's not great. Or anyway, I know it's complicated. I thought Vibrio was complicated, and we got through that.
Well, I'm certainly willing to talk to my counterparts in ag if there's dairy cow type solutions. So I don't know. We'll continue that conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
But Matt's got his hand up.
Good, Matt.
Thanks, Seth. I just want to. Wayne did a good job of stating it very early in this presentation, but I just want to remind everybody once again, these are two completely separate issues. So Seth, I think you might have just made the comment about, you know, there's other wastewater treatment plants in the area in Buzzards Bay. There are, and we may have to model them. The closures that Fairhaven and Dartmouth are experiencing are a direct result of CSO activations. Yeah. There are no CSOs in Upper Buzzards Bay. There are no CSOs on Cape. There are a handful on the North Shore, largely in prohibited areas already. So I just want to make sure no one conflates those two topics. Yeah. Yes, there could be some expanded safety zone prohibited areas around the effluent pipes of treatment plants after we conduct our modeling, but the closures that everybody is suffering from, and we know they're suffering, it is a direct result of CSO release of straight raw sewage into the environment. And the only other thing I would throw out there, just because you had asked earlier, Seth, about what DMF is doing, and I think everybody already knows, but maybe for any new folks on the call, the Shellfish program, since we've started instituting these closures, the emergency closures, because of the CSOs, has quadrupled our efforts in these areas, trying to minimize the impacts to not only the growers who are affected, but to the municipalities, the recreational diggers, the commercial diggers, all the wild harvester guys. We have over 300 growing areas in the state, and we can't put all of our resource into just two because they happen to be hot topics. But we've done, in my mind, my crew has done an amazing job of using literally every tool at our disposal that we are aware of to lessen the impacts to the surrounding areas and to not wait the 21 days for the closure to automatically lift, but to sample after the 7th day and open as early as the 8th day, including, getting product donated from other towns to compare against clean samples, increasing lab productivity and efficiency, running samples all over the state, because right now the only lab that we have that we can use to open with MSC sampling is the depuration plant lab. As you just heard, the depuration plant's closed. The lab is still functional. So I just wanted to reiterate the point that we're doing everything we can to minimize the impacts. I think what you're looking for is bigger picture. How do we avoid the impacts? And I would leave that to the group to discuss.
Thank you.
Okay, Matt, thanks. And so Dale, I'm going to recognize you really quickly because I need to wrap up the meeting here. We're over time, but we have a few other items to get to, but go ahead, Dale. I'll give you the last word on this.
I just want to speak in support of what Matt just said. You folks have gone over and above what is required to help us out, and that's completely appreciated and recognized. And so I'm not doing this to try to antagonize you or to try to sneak behind your back. I think it would be good to have an open conversation about it. But in the end, I thank you for the help that you've been giving us so far.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Dale. Okay, so we're going to quickly moving along, folks. We're trying to wrap this up and get you guys out of here. Before I go to public comments, I just wanted to just caucus the panel members to see, are there any additional future agenda item meetings that you wanted to raise to put on our radar so that we can kind of start flushing that out for the next meeting? Dale.
I'm sorry, I'm being such a pain in the ass, but bulk tagging needs to be revisited and discussed some more. So that's all I'll say about it at this point.
It'll be front and center in the next agenda. Okay, anybody else? Amy, go ahead.
We had discussed the green crab issue at the last meeting. It was my understanding that Wayne was going to meet with Senator Tarr and was just looking for an update on that because it's definitely a problem that's not going away.
Yeah, and my understanding, and Wayne, jump here if I'm wrong, I believe that that meeting is scheduled for next week. Is that correct, Wayne?
Yeah, unfortunately, Amy, the meeting we anticipated in November was in December. That meeting was postponed until next week, as Bob indicated. So that question will be asked and we'll report back immediately after that meeting.
Okay, great.
Great. Anything else we want to add to the agenda? Wayne, you have on here upcoming meeting dates. Are you proposing them? Are you caucusing people? In the interest of time, if you're just caucusing, I'm gonna ask that you do it behind the scenes.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, everyone, I want to thank you all for attending. I really appreciate the substantive conversation and appreciate the good attendance. Happy that folks should be here and with all the updates. And I guess with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
There's public comment. Did you want
thank
to
you.
skip
No,
that?
totally. My bad. I totally forgot about that. Thanks, Jared.
I'll give my spiel on this. Folks from the members of the public that do want to speak, you can use the raise hand function. I will give you access to speak and recognize you, and we'll give you a couple moments to say your piece. Scott Soers, you're recognized.
Thanks a lot, Jared. Can you hear me?
I can, Scott.
Thanks very much. I just want to echo Dale's compliments and thanks to the division. In fact, it was just this morning, very early, that I met with Matt Camisa, gave him a sample, brought him out to the farm, gave him some more oysters. This has been going on since January of 2024 for me. But again, just to put it in context, and I know the division is fully aware of this, but for everyone on the call, for me as a grower, I was closed 210 days in 2024. And ultimately, what's being proposed to take a second look at and see what is possible, in my mind, is a great start to see where we can go. Because although, camps may have been used in one way in the past, that doesn't mean that they can't be used a different way moving forward. And in the spirit of what the division has continued to do by trying to work with growers to try to get us open, I would submit that going in the direction of at least looking at how we can do things differently, like has already been done, would be continuing on with just what's been happening, and ultimately give us some hope that our businesses, and in particular my business, I'll be able to continue to maintain that. Because I can tell you right now, and you might all imagine, that being closed 210 days out of the year is not sustainable for my business. And I know last year was a dry year on top of it. And although I know that it's not all about rainfall, nonetheless, rainfall is the primary culprit on when we see these CSO discharges. And I know it's a $1.2 billion problem to fix New Bedford. But if we can just get at the 5 of the 27 that are 70+% of the discharge, that's coming into Buzzards Bay, that's going to improve our situation a great deal. And to that end, as was already mentioned, I know there are at least 3 House bills, 2 Senate bills around CSOs that have varying terms of when they might fix these things, whether it's by 2050 or by 2035. Anything that we can move in that direction to fix this problem, to get surge out of the water, won't only help us as growers, but will reopen recreational activity in places like Dartmouth, Mattapoisett, Fairhaven, as well as the commercial activity that goes away, the same as our farm harvesting goes away whenever these areas are closed. So there's a number of different incentives to getting this thing fixed, and it's great to hear that we're moving in that direction. And lastly, great to hear, and I know the results are still out, Wayne, on Dartmouth, but great to hear that's not likely going to be another problem that we have to worry about, that ultimately could be the nail in the coffin for my business. So I really appreciate all the work that's gone on around this, and we'll look forward to listening in and learning more about how this new committee moves forward and how we can get at some camps around this CSO issue that allows us to stay open. So thanks very much. Thank you for your time and your attention. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Very good.
Bob, I'm not seeing any other hands raised for the audience. So if you want to move to adjourn, go right ahead.
Thank you, Jared. Okay, folks, thank you again. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second.
And a second.
Okay, very good. Appreciate it. And we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, guys.
We'll be getting back to you soon with many of the things that we discussed today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Bob. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.